So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As you probably know, I am Jean-Yves Le Gall. I am president of CNES and the president-elect of IAF, and it is my pleasure to welcome you today to what I see as what I can call a new day for industry, for the increasing number of IAF industry organizations. The IAF Industry Relations Committee has dedicated the past year to creating a robust and highly pertinent agenda, as you will see for yourselves today. And we have distinguished senior executives, representative of what is so-called the new space, as well as our traditional industry partners, all of them here to discuss the changing landscape of the global space markets. I see today as a highlight of this Congress, and I am certain that you will find all of the speeches extremely interesting and relevant to your own business interests. I want to thank the leadership of the IRC with Dr. Robbie Samantha Roy of Lockheed Martin, Mr. Clemory of Blue Origin, and Mr. Mark Mulkin of Boeing. And now I want to hand over the microphone to Mr. Frank Moring of Aviation Week and Space Technology, and to our first distinguished industry representative, Mr. Greg Wyler, founder of OneWeb. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here today. I'm Frank Moring with Aviation Week, and we're going to be talking about what some people call new space today. And our first presenter is Greg Wyler, who is executive chairman and founder of OneWeb. He's basically a career digital divide minimizer, I think might be a way to describe him. He's also the founder of O3B, which I think stands for the other 3 billion. And he's also worked for Google, and I'm going to let him talk, and then we'll have questions and answers, and I hope everybody here has lots of questions for all of our presenters today. We have 4, and I think you'll find it an interesting morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So it's great to be here and talk to everybody and share a bit about the vision and why we're doing this, because I know this is a space conference, and we do have a lot of space geeks in our team, our fast-growing team, but we're also here for a mission, and that's really the most important part of it, which is enabling affordable access for everyone. I've been in telecom and run fiber, and I'll talk about a few of these things, but we're really about enabling affordable access by any means. It doesn't really matter that it's space or something else. We just happen to think that this constellation of satellites is the best way to go about it. But there are other ideas, and each of them will serve a purpose. So a little bit about my history. I got this great question yesterday. I spoke in the other room, which is interesting. I was sitting there earlier, a little bit earlier today, but I spoke there yesterday and to a bunch of people. And one of the questions was, how did my career, my history, affect the mission? For a number of years after I had started my first company and sold it when I was in my 20s, I went to Africa and started to connect schools to the internet. And I found I was on satellite, and the geosatellites were really had latency, but I started running fiber. So I actually ran quite a bit of fiber, and so in some very, very difficult places. And it became the first actually fiber to the home in Africa. I went to fiber universities and fiber to schools. And it was quite challenging terrain. But something I noticed was that when you brought connectivity to people, their whole life changed. They opened up with new hope and opportunities that they didn't have before. They could see and learn and connect to people around the world and become another version of themselves. Like it's a 2.0 of each individual once they get access to the global community and the world's information. And it really became something which was light for me and a vision and a direction which has been carrying on for the past 10 or 12 years. And I had gone to WISIS in 2004, and the WISIS World Society of Information Systems, they had 2 targets. Target 1 was connect all villages with ICTs and community access points. And target 2 was connect all secondary and primary schools with ICTs. And this had an effect on me because I was in Tunisia and there was all these people and I didn't know much about this connecting emerging market things. I was doing as much as I could, but I wasn't really in the global community. And it was my first time to talk to lots of other people with similar ambitions and goals in this global mission. And it really outlined and highlighted to me something that was for us and for me a mission that was important, and for many other people. So back to Africa, ended up building a lot of 3G, put the first 3G in Africa actually, and solar powered plant towers, and really local teams. So this is all is all part of getting OneWeb to where it is about understanding the issues, understanding what it means to live here. Now you say that's very rural and it's a poor population, but it's also schools and health centers and people with lots of needs. So getting to understand their issues is a big part of understanding how to bring connectivity to them. And I'm going to show you some of those things in a moment. So in 2012, after building O3B, and I built O3B because I built this network which had gigabit fiber and stuff in Rwanda and a little bit in the Congo. And even though it was really fast in the network, it was really slow over geosatellite. So everyone had to go over a geosatellite link to get to the internet. And I couldn't do anything about it. So I said, well, let's see if we can bring the satellites closer. And decided to design O3B and went out and thought, hey, you know what? I'm in a position where I understand the needs of the cultures that we're dealing with on the in the rural areas, and I also understand the U.S. and the funding issues. So if I have a foot in both places and I know how to build this, then it's something I must do. I didn't think we'd actually do it, by the way. I just thought I really must do it and see how it turned out. And we raised $1.5 billion and built O3B, and it's up and running and doing very well. It's the world's fastest satellite system, as far as I know, with speeds over 2 gigabits per second in a single link. But that was back in 2007 when I started that and sold off the telcos. And 2012, I started thinking, hey, you know, 54% of the world is still not connected. This is an issue. So how do we solve that? We really need to take another step forward on that. And then I looked at the WISES Targets Review. So the WISES people got together and they said, here's the result after 10 years of WISES and this big global mission with OECD countries and all these different, the World Bank and everybody involved. In terms of internet access and use, target 1 is unlikely to be achieved. And you go to the brass sentence, access to the internet in any form is extremely low for rural households in developing countries. So this is like still a huge issue. So it became a mission. Okay, if we can get connectivity to every single school, if we could get, let's say, at least 50 megabits per second, if we could do it solar powered, if we could have it self-installed and have Wi-Fi and LTE, if we could have this sort of magic thing you could place on a school, and we have 2 million schools that aren't connected, if you could have a high school age girl install that and become the ISP for her region, then we could solve it. They could solve it. Everyone could solve it together. And that became the mission of OneWeb. How do we make a self-installable terminal that is easy to put on and is low cost and can be installed by anybody who speaks any language with no instructions? So the first place you go when you want to build a satellite system is the ITU. I learned this from O3B. It turned out that the KU spectrum was available, and we were very fortunate to get the priority rights in KU, and from that we were able to design and build a system, which I'm going to show you a little bit about right now. And design and build a system which provided tremendous amounts of capacity, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But this is just a bit about how it works. This is how we originated, and then we've evolved since then. I'll show you a little more in a moment. But you have a gateway on the ground. This is in Egypt, and it's picking up connectivity from the fiber cables. It sends the connectivity up to the satellite, and then down to all the beams on the ground. Now, each of those beams is a different frequency, and as you're underneath those beams, the frequencies evolve or change as you move from beam to beam. We're putting a polar orbit up because for us, it's important that we capture 100% of the globe. Everybody should be connected. And there are a lot of people who live in the polar Arctic Circle that need connectivity, and up in the higher latitudes, as well as in the equatorial latitudes. So we can't forget about anybody here. This is every school, not some, not most, not 99%, but really every unconnected school. So this is a plane, and we'll have up to 49 satellites in every plane. And as you can see now, we're going to show that we have 18 separate planes. So why do we stop at sort of 900 satellites? And I get that question a bunch. Because that's about as far as we felt comfortable going, because one of our biggest and most important things are that we take care of space. So space debris is a huge concern of ours. It's something that we have dedicated a team to since the beginning to make sure that our missed distances and that our satellites are controllable and deorbit and that nothing remains. So it's really crucial to us. So that was about as far as we could shove that many satellites into a 1,200 kilometer orbit. So I'm going to show you something else that I thought you might appreciate, a little bit about the technology, and then I'm going to come back and let me see if this shows up on the screen. One of our biggest partners is Qualcomm. We're extremely fortunate to have Qualcomm. They have a tremendous background and experience in handover. Right? They're in all your cell phones, or 95% of them. They build those chips that, 2.5 million chips a day they're delivering to all the different cell phones in the world. And they've just been a fantastic partner in understanding how to deal with all the corner cases. And I'll talk about that in a second. So what you're seeing is the geo system, and then you're coming into OneWeb. And you can see where OneWeb is and how our satellites are circling the Earth and the coverage that we have. So let's just show you a quick shot here of the coverage. It's a little hard to see from here, but I'm going to try and hit it. So this is, let's see if we can move this out of the way. This is the coverage, and as you can see, we do cover the entire globe with lots of multiple points of multiple coverage. But something kind of fun to look at, I thought, would be just if I could zoom in right here and show you, for example, let's see if I can hit it because I can't see the. There we go. So this is an example of how we have beams, these very, very unique beams that we did with Qualcomm. And they're very thin beams, and they're very wide, and they enable us to really have tremendous amounts of throughput without interfering with any of the geo satellites. Super important that we cause no interference for our brothers and sisters in the geo orbit. And so this has enabled us to do that. And there's we have about 150 engineers full-time inside of Qualcomm, just sort of to give you a metric on that. But I'm going to show you something really cool here. You might ask, well, okay, so what's the hardest part? We're building this big system. Well, there's a bunch of hard parts. But what's the hardest technical part? The hardest part has nothing to do with satellites. This is the hardest part, not the lifesaver, but the chip. Building a chip that is so small, that has so much power, that it can run on only a few watts and can provide hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of megabits per second of connectivity. That's the hard part. And we were very fortunate to have Qualcomm, with all their experience in building these chips at 14 nanometers and access to all the labs around the world and fabs, to really take their technology and to put it into building a system design. So it's really been going quite well. The chip is actually out there, and we're now working on the software. So it's out of the fab already. So latency. So this is super important for us. We wanted to get the latency down. So this is where you are at geo, and we all are probably pretty familiar with this. And then we brought it to 130 kilometers at OneWeb, or O3b at that's a MEO orbit, 130 milliseconds. And then we wanted to bring it down to 1,200 kilometers to 30 milliseconds. That latency is super important. So our capabilities and the use of OneWeb will be identical in performance to any fiber or cable modem. You won't know the difference. In fact, we've done some gaming tests where we've done statistical testing of people running Counter-Strike on cable modems and OneWeb emulators. And we found that there's no statistical difference on the performance on OneWeb to a cable modem. So we take the hardest to satisfy group of customers, and they were very, very eager and happy with it because there was no statistical difference. So we can do cellular backhaul with it. So we look no different to a cell infrastructure, to the core network, the MME, to the eNode B. We look no different than fiber or microwave. So it's just another topology or another transport topology for the cellular operators. And that allows us to light up roads and actually literally light up, because as we work with LED companies that are lighting up roads, we can attach LTE to them. And so you can bring more and more capacity into these areas. So Coca-Cola, you may know, is an investor of ours and a great partner. They have about 39 million distribution sites around the world. They're in over 200 countries. They're the world's oldest distributor, right? And you know, anywhere you go, you find a cold Coke, which is pretty impressive. So to give their people opportunity and their distributors more revenue opportunities and opportunities to help bring connectivity to their small and remote and rural locations is really important to them and to us. So what do? Well, you can put a terminal in your house, and you'll have very high-speed capability, 100 megabits per second. You'll have LTE, you'll have IoT. It's all designed to be really easy and self-installable. And let's come back to that. What we really want to do is be able to install these things, have a high school girl install these. Oops, let's pop. Next slide here. Have oops, hold on one second. We wanted to make sure that this could be installed by a high school girl with no training. There we go. And so we designed a catapult. We call it Community Access Terminal. We wanted to make it so that you could actually install internet inside of a few minutes. So you're at your school, you slide the roof clip on, clamp it down, and put our little terminal on. Now, our terminals are actually getting smaller and smaller and smaller. This is one example of where we were. We have some new terminals that will be even much smaller than this that we're really excited about. But they're getting smaller and easy to self-install, and that's it. You slide the solar panels on and plug it in, and you're done. And we've done a lot of testing on it. How do we make sure that the clips and the terminals can hold on schools and in rural locations? How can we make sure that they can sit there and provide services and access and Wi-Fi and LTE into those locations? And that's something really important to our mission and really important to the governments and the countries that we're servicing, we're planning to, or in process of servicing. Another aspect that a lot of people are very excited about and a lot of governments are very excited about is our ability to provide a vehicle cellular network. So this is a first responder issue. So there you are on your fire truck, you're driving along, and your AT&T tower falls down, goes away, or you drive past it. Our system will actually sense that tower is not there. And that system, that roof mount device, which is getting smaller and smaller actually as we speak, that roof mount device actually becomes your cell tower within milliseconds. It actually becomes, you don't drop the call even though the cell tower is gone. And so we're finding an incredible interest from the FirstNet, first responder community on how we can bring this network together with a small device, and how we can allow cars to create self-organizing networks in times of disaster and emergency. Now, of course, we'll do trains and we'll do planes. Airbus is a great investor of ours, but we'll work with everybody, all the other manufacturers, because a small conformal antenna is where it's heading, and Rockwell Collins is now building that for us, and we'll be in a lot of aircraft starting in 2019 and 2020. And the terminals are really, really small. They're within the boundary layer of the aircraft, so there's no drag. So where are we at launch? Well, we've bought 21 Soyuz. We have 5 options on them, which we're going to be executing. And then we have some Ariane 6. We have 39 Virgin Galactics. You're going to hear about them. And we're actually going to be picking up some more stuff. So we're going to be accelerating our network because of the demand. And there's a lot of really cool things coming up that we're excited about. So on facilities and manufacturing, I know we're back into the satellite world. We have a new factory in process in Florida, and this one will be ready next year. We have a facility in Toulouse, France, where we do our first line, and then we're doing 2 other lines here in Florida for high volume rate production of our satellites. We're actually able to build 3 satellites per day in this facility, and we're really fortunate, again, talk about partners. Airbus builds 50 A320s a month. So we're able to take a lot of their engineering and manufacturing engineers and bring them on. They've been really super helpful in helping us build a really fully digital factory. So this comes back to the mission. How do we enable connectivity for everyone? We're going to build a system that will empower communities to build their own networks. So it'll be up to them, it'll be their system and their network, and we'll just be supporting them and enabling that to happen. So that's about OneWeb, and thank you.
Thanks, Greg. We have volunteers, I believe, in the audience, so just raise your hand if you have questions. And let me start off by asking about your revenue stream. You mentioned that. Is this sort of a from each according to his ability kind of deal?
We will be able to charge what is affordable to the places that we're providing the services. It's going to be both affordable and competitive. So in some markets, it'll be affordable based upon what the alternatives are, and in other markets, it'll be affordable based upon the local GDP, not based upon alternatives. So we're able to vary that and maintain profitability at all the various levels.
Well, let's talk about one of your schools then in Africa. How would they pay for this service, and how much would it cost them?
Well, this is interesting. I was at the UN last week speaking on this topic, and one thing that we discussed at the Broadband Commission was creating a model bid to connect every school of the world by 2022. Every school, where all the countries will upload the GPS locations of their schools, and it'll be a single bid, maybe in regionalized fashion, where you're connecting millions of schools. And by aggregating all of those rural schools into a single bid, you end up having a great reduction in cost. So to give an example, we see, schools can countries have educational budgets that can afford hundreds of dollars per school. They can't afford thousands of dollars per school. So we would be able to provide services in that range that allows them to have very high-speed bandwidth to access all the capabilities that you have if you're sitting in New York or Menlo Park, while you're sitting in Namibia or Nigeria in the most rural areas. And we want to make it so that the terminals are very inexpensive. I see terminal costs coming way down. They're self-installable. We have some incredible advancements in terminal technology that we'll be showing soon.
Reading your website, one of the interesting points you make is what you call clock speed on innovation, because you have so many satellites and because they're in low Earth orbit, and I assume fairly short-lived. You're able to upgrade quickly. I wonder if you could talk about how you flow your upgrades into the orbiting system.
So there's two things, actually. I could show you a little bit about, probably easier just to talk about it right now. There are a couple ways of thinking about that question. Number one is, how do we deal with the continuous iteration of our satellites? And the way we do that is, with a full digital factory, we know every screw, every nut, the torque of every screw and every nut on every satellite, the bolt pattern of every screw and every satellite, every nut and bolt. So we are actually having tremendous amounts of data on every satellite, and once we turn on the satellite in the factory, it's connected forever. It goes off to the NOC from a Wi-Fi and then onwards on other connectivity methodologies. So we are keeping track of that satellite. And then as anomalies develop, which of course there will be in the beginning, this is really hard stuff, we'll flow the information back into the factory and iterate real time. And so that's one aspect of enabling our satellites for what I believe will be some of the most reliable satellites in the world. By the time we get to satellite number 400, we're going to have more, hours of use than many other satellites, or probably any other satellite in the world. And you'll have more changes and iterations on it. But then there's also iterations of improvements in capacity. And we have a lot of iterations and ideas on the table. Right now we're locked because we're launching next year. So we're pretty well locked on our satellite. We have tested the components, and we're really, maybe the beginning of 18. I don't want to hold anybody to the exact date. But we're pretty well locked on Gen 1. But we also have next step function improvements in satellites coming down the path. So we have a long time horizon of improvements to keep up with the demand and the need. Well, we'll never keep up with the demand. The demand is 54% of the world, but we're going to do our best.
Could you describe a little bit how, sort of your deployment plan, how you go from your first 10 to the full 900, and then what sort of replenishment launch rate you would see?
So the deployment plan, we're using Virgin Galactic for sending up one or two at a time, and we'll be, and those are interesting because we can launch literally within hours of production. So we can build 3 and launch 3, right? So it's really amazing as they get up to speed, and George is going to talk more about that. in the heavy lift, the bulk of the lift will be done right now by Soyuz, an incredibly reliable launcher, and so we're doing 32 satellites per Soyuz, and they bring them up to about 500 kilometers, and then the satellites have electric propulsion. So we've actually again, for instance, our electric propulsion is done. It's tested. Our high volume manufacturing version is tested at long lifetimes. So we've got that, and so those will go 32 of them will come around the Earth and rise up to 1,200 kilometers.
And then for your replenishment, once you're up to the full,
as they fail, or as different pieces of them or anomalies where we want to replace them, we actually deorbit them. Mm-hmm. So we have a very high, it's probably the most reliable part of our system is our deorbit side, because you've got to get them down and then they burn up. And then as you bring them up, as you bring other satellites up there, you can just slightly change the altitude. And as you change the altitude of the ring, they go slower or faster. So you kind of make way for another one. And you close the ring and you open it up, and that's all automated. So we've done a lot of analytics on how to automate that from software. Because you can't control these satellites like you do at GEO, where you got 5 people kind of staring at each one. They need to be automated.
And your assumptions on how often you'll need to do that?
Well, that's going to be a curve, right? So initially, we'll probably have to change more because some will fail in the initial early days. And then over time, it's going to probably be really small amount because, as I said, by the time we get to number 400, the satellites last 10 years around fuel, 10 to 12. So by the time you get to number 400, there's not going to be a need to change, except we will be upgrading the satellites for the same reason that American Airlines upgrades from the 727 to a 737 and 757 because there's better performance. We will upgrade.
Any questions from the floor? I see one down on the front row of someone with a microphone.
Oh yeah, thank you. Philip Davies from Deimos UK. Just a question on the orbits. You mentioned you want to have polar orbits, that way you can get coverage right to the poles. But my question is, why don't you have a constellation where you have some in polar orbit and some in low inclination orbits, given that a huge number of your customers will be in the sort of equatorial zones?
I think the question, I couldn't hear it exactly, was it, why not use low inclination orbits?
Polar and low inclination, use both.
Well, it turns out that the hardest part of our system is the handover, not the satellites. And having a really clean handover method, clean as it gets, we still have an enormous amount of corner cases, gives us the best way to start the system. To have the lowest number, which is still a large number, of corner cases to make sure that nobody drops a packet, even when they're on edge of coverage and edge of beam and edge of... The other thing that you learn about on an inclined orbit, which this is a this is a conversation I have with a lot of people, and then we've had a lot of PhDs dive into this. Inclined orbits are better if you have sort of an infinite number of satellites, but if you have less than some huge number of satellites, it's better to have a polar orbit in terms of coverage. And inclined orbits also have a lot of issues that we found with in terms of space debris and misdistances because they're all kind of huddled in very sporadic, non-marching order regimes. And so for us, for our purposes, we decided on a polar orbit. It doesn't mean inclined orbits are bad. It doesn't mean they won't work and you can't build a nice system with them. It just means from our view and for the system and the design and the architecture and the handover requirements, we settled on the polar orbit. Doesn't mean we couldn't add inclined orbits in the future, as you talked about. And there'll be a number of surprises in our bag that over time we'll see that may not be exactly what we're doing now.
I see a question down here. Front row.
Yeah, slightly an unfortunate question for our unfortunate times, but we've seen how Al-Qaeda and ISIS have used Twitter and social media to spread their message and use them as instruments of terror, essentially. I guess my question would be, do you have the ability to control terminals on the ground in areas from being used for nefarious purposes?
That's a very good question and a very difficult question. One person's nefariousness is another person's freedom, right? And I'm not in a position to make a decision about what one person is saying, but we've made a decision to not be involved in the content. But we do have techniques and capabilities that allow governments and others to feel comfortable with the way that they have access or need to control, in the sense that we can lock our terminals to a particular gateway. So if the government says, look, you can't sell in our country, then if a terminal goes in that country, it's not going to work. I'm not talking about content or censorship. I'm just saying about allowing somebody to have access and allowing the drifting of terminals in different places. So we do have that ability to lock the terminals, geo-lock the terminals to enable, and that's been really important for some governments to enable so that they know where the bits are flowing. That's another reason why we didn't do inter-satellite links. Inter-satellite links opens up a whole new world of issues on a government-by-government basis, because you don't know where the bits are flowing. And so these are just things that we have to think about to be very considerate of the different cultures that we're going to be working with.
We have time for one more question. Back in the back there, standing up.
Oops. Hello? Yes. Hi, Greg. This is Fernando. So I have a question about the Earth station. So you already talked about the constellations. You already explained how you're going to launch. So it's going to be a very ambitious project. But what about the Earth station? How many Earth stations do you need to build all these?
So we have about 50 to 70 gateways, Earth station locations around the world. And it was actually a very interesting review about, do we do an inter-satellite link, which brings the complications that we just talked about. So there's a huge issue with censorship and that every government you have to deal with is concerned about. And what can we do to cover the entire world using a bent pipe architecture? So between 50 and 75 Earth station locations around the world, and we're going to have a very almost consumer implementation of those Earth stations. Now, consumers won't buy them, but if we're going to put them in all these places around the world, it has to be very easy to install and very simple and very cheap. And so we've got a really cool process for that.
Okay, thank you.
One quick one over here, please.
Thanks, Frank. Greg, sorry if you covered this earlier, but at the groundbreaking in Florida, you talked about producing these satellites for other customers besides OneWeb, for other purposes. Do you have any updates on that? Any customers that are interested? And maybe if you have just a second to talk about what other applications these sorts of satellites can be used for. Thanks.
Thanks. It was a great question. So I kind of talk about the Earth as like our 5-star planet, right? We've got this awesome place to live, and you really want to have good, strong evidence of how we're affecting it. And so there's another side to what we're doing, which is, wouldn't it be great if you could have more sensors and more understanding of what's going on? And there's a lot of people working on this. But how can we open up the satellite production we're doing so that others can get better views of Earth, that they can build 1 or 2 satellites, or 10 or 20 or 50, and get better repeatability and better information to, again, for that 5-star planet. Go to a 5-star hotel, they're monitoring the bathrooms, how often they're clean, they're monitoring the pool, and whether, you know, and the pollution or the dirt on the front lawn or whatever. And so we need to do the same thing with our Earth, because it's where we live, it's our place. And so we want to help that. And so we're seeing a lot of sensor people talking to us. They're wanting 1s, 2s, and 50s of satellites. There are quite a bit of the current constellations that people are doing constellations now and thinking about it, saying, hey, wait a minute, this is a lot cheaper way of doing it, because our satellite's only 150 kilograms, but it is a full-on telecom class satellite. We have 4 reaction wheels, redundant avionics. There's every aspect of our system it's just smaller, but it doesn't mean it's worse, right? So it's got all that stuff. And we leave a good 80 to 90 kilograms for payload with a tremendous amount of power. So we're able to accomplish a lot for other people in other markets, and we're completely open to it. So I don't know when we're gonna announce things, but there's been a pretty strong interest from people on that. And Brian Holtz, who leads OneWeb Satellites, is out on the road talking to them as we speak. He's been meeting with a lot of different candidates and potential customers.
Thanks. Let's give Greg a big round of applause for an interesting presentation.